Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Younger Dryas Boundary Layer. In the early 2000s, a team led by nuclear analytical chemist Richard Firestone at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory wasn't looking for anything catastrophic. They were doing routine radiocarbon and elemental work on sediment cores from Clovis-era archaeological sites in North America, sharpening the timeline of when the last mammoths died and when the Clovis toolmakers vanished. Standard paleoclimate housekeeping. The standard model of the Younger Dryas, the sudden one, 300-year cold snap that hit Earth around 12,800 years ago, attributes it to a freshwater pulse from Lake Agassiz collapsing into the North Atlantic, shutting down thermohaline circulation. It's slow, it's oceanographic, it leaves no exotic minerals. The sediment record above and below the boundary should be geochemically boring. The team pulled out the cores. The boundary layer wasn't boring. It was full of nanodiamonds, iron-rich microspherules, and carbon spherules, signatures normally produced by cosmic impact or airburst events. Firestone and 25 co-authors published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2007, reporting the assemblage at 24 sites across North America and Europe. A follow-up 2012 PNAS paper by Ted Bunch at Northern Arizona University reported melt glass with formation temperatures above 2,200 degrees Celsius. Later work extended the layer to more than 50 sites across 4 continents, including a Syrian settlement, Abu Huraira, that was found blanketed in the same material. Critics tried to make it go away. Andrew Scott at Royal Holloway proposed the nanodiamonds were graphene fragments from wildfires, but Bunch's melt glass required temperatures no wildfire produces. Volcanism was ruled out, no matching tephra anywhere. Anthropogenic contamination fails because the layer sits at the exact same stratigraphic depth across 4 continents. One after another, every mundane cause has failed to explain the full assemblage at the full geographic scale. This is not proof of a lost civilization. It is proof of a catastrophe our species survived, one whose survivors would have watched the sky burn, the world freeze, and their entire generation reset inside a single lifetime. What did they see in the sky that summer, and why does nothing they might have built remain? A calmer wound in the record sits underwater. Number 9. The Yonaguni Monument. In 1986, a Japanese dive tour operator named Kihachiro Aratake was scouting new sites for hammerhead shark encounters off the southern tip of Yonaguni, the westernmost island of Japan. He was mapping coral. He was not looking for architecture. 25 meters down, his lights hit a wall of flat, right-angled stone. The standard geological model for that region is straightforward. The bedrock is Miocene-era sandstone and mudstone, prone to fracturing along orthogonal joint systems when stressed by tectonic activity. The Ryukyu arc is seismically active. Sharp corners, terraces, and step-like fractures are exactly what erosion of that lithology, along those joints, is expected to produce. The formation Aratake found extends more than 50 meters in length. It has right-angle terraces, a flat plateau, parallel channels, and what look like carved steps. Masaki Kimura, marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, has argued since the late 1990s that the site shows toolmark evidence and shaped stone consistent with human modification, potentially cut before the land was submerged by post-glacial sea level rise roughly 10,000 years ago. Robert Schoch, geologist at Boston University, dived the site and concluded the features are consistent with natural bedding plane erosion. Both are working geologists. Both looked at the same rock. Every attempt to close the argument has failed. Natural-only advocates cannot fully explain the isolated round holes or the paired parallel channels some divers have documented. Human modification advocates cannot produce a single unambiguous artifact, no pottery, no tools, no organic material recoverable for direct dating. Every new dive produces new photographs, new interpretations, and no consensus. The dispute has now run for almost 40 years. If Kimura is even partially correct, human beings were shaping stone at a scale that required organization before the rise of every civilization we have a name for. Who, if anyone, cut those steps into a wall that would not be underwater again for another 6,000 years? Above the waterline, one Turkish hillside forced the timeline itself to bend. Number 8. Göbekli Tepe. In 1963, An Istanbul-Chicago archaeological survey team walked over a low hill in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill. They noted broken limestone slabs, cataloged them as a medieval Byzantine cemetery marker, and moved on. Nobody dug. On paper, the hill was uninteresting. The standard model of civilization, taught in every introductory anthropology course for a century, ran in this order. Humans learned agriculture. Surplus food allowed larger populations. Larger populations built permanent settlements, and finally settled societies produced monumental architecture, because monumental architecture requires organized labor that only agricultural surplus can feed. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute re-examined the hill and understood what the 1963 team had walked past. Beneath the surface lay T-shaped megalithic pillars, some over 5 meters tall, carved with lions, foxes, vultures, and scorpions. Radiocarbon dating of organic material at Göbekli Tepe places the oldest layers at roughly 9,600 BCE, about 11,600 years ago. That is more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, and over 7,000 years older than the earliest known writing. The site is pre-pottery. It is pre-agriculture in that region. Schmidt's team documented the findings across multiple papers in Antiquity, Neolithics, and Documenta Prehistorica through the late 1990s and 2000s. Every proposed way to preserve the old timeline has collapsed. The dating was independently confirmed. Suggestions that the site was built later and misdated failed against multiple radiocarbon sequences. Attempts to reinterpret the pillars as small ritual objects failed against their sheer weight, up to 10 tons each. Suggestions that a tiny band of specialists built it alone failed against the labor estimates. Hundreds of people, coordinated, fed, and sheltered for years before any of that was supposed to be possible. Everything you were taught about the sequence of human civilization is at best incomplete. Someone organized this, and they did it without any of the prerequisites we believed were required. If organized humans could raise 10-ton pillars before farming, what were they doing for the tens of thousands of years before that, and where are those sites? The story of our species also contains a moment when there were almost no storytellers left. Number 7. The genetic bottleneck. In the mid-1990s, evolutionary anthropologists were doing routine mitochondrial DNA surveys, building trees of human genetic variation to estimate migration routes out of Africa. The work was quiet. The goal was mapping who went where and when. Nobody was searching for evidence that our species had almost ceased to exist. The standard evolutionary model expects genetic diversity in a widespread species to be broad. Homo sapiens spread across Africa, into the Levant, and beyond over hundreds of thousands of years. If population sizes were stable over that period, our mitochondrial diversity should look like that of most large mammals, wide, deep, geographically structured. It does not. Human genetic diversity, across the entire species, is astonishingly narrow, narrower by many measures than that of a single subspecies of chimpanzee. Something crushed the population. In a 1998 paper in the Journal of Human Evolution, Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois proposed that the Toba supervolcanic eruption in Sumatra, dated to roughly 74,000 years ago, caused a global volcanic winter that reduced the human breeding population to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. Henry Harpending at the University of Utah had already reached similar bottleneck estimates from genetic data alone. Multiple later studies, using different genetic markers, reproduced the signal of a severe reduction. Attempts to dissolve the bottleneck have not held. A team led by Michael Petraglia, working at Jawalapuram in India, argued human occupation continued through the Toba ash layer, but this challenges the timing of the crash, not its existence. Alternative causes have been proposed: disease, climate oscillation, other unknown eruptions. None removes the genetic signature. The narrowness of our diversity is not disputed, only its cause is. Every human being alive today is descended from a group small enough to fit inside a single modern high school gymnasium. Your entire family tree, every branch, in every direction, passes through that tiny surviving population. What did those few thousand people know, remember, and lose about the world before their near extinction? A more recent revision buried an entire chapter of the American story. Number 6. The White Sands Footprints. In 2019, a team led by Matthew Bennett at Bournemouth University and David Bustas of the National Park Service was surveying fossil trackways in the ancient lake beds of White Sands National Park in New Mexico. The project was ordinary vertebrate paleontology, mapping mammoth, giant sloth, and dire wolf tracks preserved in gypsum-rich sediments. The standard model of human arrival in the Americas, dominant for most of the 20th century, was the Clovis First hypothesis. Humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, after the ice sheets began to retreat and an ice-free corridor opened. Anything human, anywhere in the Americas, older than that was assumed to be misdated or misidentified. The team documented human footprints, small, clearly bipedal, mostly of children and teenagers, pressed into the same sediment layers as the extinct megafauna. Bennett and colleagues published in Science in September 2021, dating the tracks to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, using radiocarbon on Rupia serosa seeds embedded in the print layers. That is at least 6,000 years earlier than Clovis. In 2023, an independent follow-up study by Jeffrey Pagati of the U.S. Geological Survey, also in Science, confirmed the dating using two entirely different methods, pollen radiocarbon and optically stimulated luminescence. The immediate objection was that Rupia seeds absorb old carbon from groundwater, inflating apparent ages. The 2023 study dismantled that by using terrestrial pollen, which does not have the reservoir effect, and independent OSL, which measures the last time sediment grains saw sunlight. Both methods agreed. Both were reviewed. The Clovis First framework, as originally stated, is finished. Human beings were walking across North America during the last glacial maximum, when the ice sheets were at their absolute peak. Everything you were taught about when your continent was first entered is wrong by thousands of years. If those children were there at 22,000 years ago, who came before them, and where did they go? Not every anomaly on this list has strong evidence behind it. The next one has almost none. Number 5. The objects inside the coal. Coal miners, quarry workers, and stonemasons through the 19th and 20th centuries occasionally reported pulling manufactured-looking objects out of geological layers that should be tens of millions of years older than any human. Most reports were casual, undocumented, and preserved only in local newspapers or private collections. The standard geological model is uncompromising. Coal deposits form over tens of millions of years from Carboniferous-era plant matter. No hominin existed then. Nothing tool-using existed then. A metal artifact embedded in an intact coal seam is, under the standard model, physically impossible. Objects have been reported anyway. Nails, wires, metallic spheres, and, most famously, a hammer-like iron object embedded in a limestone concretion, retrieved near London, Texas in 1936. The so-called London hammer's iron head was later analyzed and described as having unusual purity and low carbon content. The concretion around it contains material of Cretaceous age. However, and this is essential, no peer-reviewed geological journal has ever published an authenticated case of a modern manufactured object stratigraphically confirmed inside undisturbed coal. Every specific case falls apart on close examination. The London hammer's concretion appears to have formed rapidly around a much younger tool, a well-documented process in mineral-rich groundwater. Other reports involve objects found in cracks, in mine tailings, or in specimens whose original stratigraphic context was never recorded. Some are outright hoaxes. The strongest defense of these finds is that they are strange. The strongest attack is that none of them meet modern archaeological standards. The evidence here is genuinely weak. That is worth saying plainly. But the honest scientific position is not impossible. It is not yet demonstrated. The category remains open only because a single properly documented case would collapse the timeline entirely. If one such object were ever recovered under controlled conditions and confirmed, what exactly would we do with it? The most honest reason we haven't found older civilizations may be geographical. Number 4. The drowned continent. In the second half of the 20th century, marine geologists working on sea level reconstruction were solving a routine problem. How much has global sea level changed since the last glacial maximum, and how fast? The goal was to calibrate ice sheet models, not to inventory lost land. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,500 to 19,000 years ago, so much water was locked into continental ice sheets that global sea level was much lower than today. Coastlines extended outward. Shallow seas were plains. Islands were mountaintops. What we now call the ocean was, for tens of thousands of years, someone's horizon. The precise numbers, once carefully assembled, are staggering. Kurt Lambeck at the Australian National University and colleagues published a comprehensive reconstruction in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2014. Sea level rose approximately 120 to 130 meters since the last glacial maximum. Independent estimates from coral records, sediment cores, and ice volume calculations all converge on the same figure. The area of continental shelf submerged represents roughly 8% of Earth's total land surface, an area larger than Europe. There is no debate about the sea level rise itself. What is debated is what was on that submerged land. Attempts to survey it are hampered by depth, sediment burial, and sheer scale, around 20 million square kilometers of drowned coastal plain. Marine archaeology at that scale, using current technology, is nearly impossible. What we have actually looked at is a tiny fraction of a fraction. Every reason a coastal population might have preferred low-lying, resource-rich shorelines during the last ice age, fresh water, shellfish, mild climate, is also a reason why any evidence of their existence is now hundreds of feet under the ocean, buried under thousands of years of marine sediment. What are we drifting over, in dive gear, when we snorkel above what used to be a plain? In at least one case, we've already found what a drowned settlement looks like. Number 3. Pavlopetri and Doggerland. In 1967, Nicholas Fleming, then a marine geologist at Cambridge, was surveying the seabed off the southern coast of Laconia in Greece. He was mapping submerged coastline changes for a study of Mediterranean sea level history. The work was geological. He was not looking for a city. The archaeological expectation for the Peloponnese in the 3rd millennium BCE was that Bronze Age settlements existed, but any found underwater would be fragmentary. A few sunken foundations, some pottery, at best a partial layout. Complete urban plans were not expected to survive submergence. Fleming's survey identified the outline of an entire town, streets, walls, courtyards, chamber tombs, preserved in shallow water off the beach at Pavlopetri. The site is dated to approximately 3500 BCE at its earliest occupation, making it one of the oldest known submerged towns in the world. In 2009, a joint team led by John Henderson at the University of Nottingham conducted a full digital survey, mapping the street plan in 3 dimensions. Meanwhile, in the North Sea, work by Briony Coles at the University of Exeter, published in the Proceedings of the Prehistoric Society in 1998, reconstructed Doggerland, the vast plain that connected Britain to mainland Europe until it drowned around 6500 BCE. Skeptics initially argued Pavlopetri was too well preserved to be that old, that it must be a later Roman-era foundation misdated. Ceramic analysis and stratigraphic sequencing confirmed the earlier dates. Doggerland's existence was doubted until commercial dredging repeatedly pulled up Mesolithic tools, bones of mammoth and elk, and worked antler artifacts from what should have been open ocean floor. The concept of a submerged human settlement is not speculation. It is a documented reality on at least 2 continents. The question is not whether they exist, it is how many, and how deep, we have simply not yet reached. If Doggerland was full of people until 6500 BCE, what did they carry with them as the sea took their homes? Some of what they carried may have survived in the strangest possible medium, story. Number 2. The flood memory. In the 19th century, comparative mythologists cataloging the folk traditions of unrelated cultures began noticing an uncomfortable pattern in their card files. They were doing philology and anthropology, not paleoclimate work. The pattern was not what they were looking for. The standard cultural evolutionary expectation is that unconnected human societies generate different foundational myths, shaped by local geography, climate, and social structure. Overlap should exist for universal experiences, sun, death, birth, but specific narrative structures should diverge. Cultures with no historical contact should not tell the same detailed story. They do. Flood narratives, describing a catastrophic global inundation survived by a small remnant, appear across cultures on every inhabited continent, in traditions with no plausible route of transmission. Anthropologist Alan Dundes catalogued dozens of such narratives, in his 1988 edited volume The Flood Myth, published by the University of California Press. The Sumerian epic of Ziusudra dates to at least 1600 BCE. Independent flood narratives are recorded among indigenous Australian, North American, Amazonian, and Polynesian cultures. Bruce Mass, an environmental archaeologist formerly at Los Alamos National Laboratory, has argued in peer-reviewed volumes that the frequency and specificity of these narratives may encode collective memory of real post-glacial flooding events. The dominant academic response has been that flood myths are convergent, that any river-based or coastal culture will independently invent a flood story because floods are common. That partly works. It does not explain the specific narrative motifs shared across cultures: the warning, the vessel, the pairs of animals, the birds sent to find land. Missionary contact explains some cases, but not the pre-contact indigenous versions. This is not proof. It is interpretation. But it is an interpretation held, cautiously, by real researchers. If they are right, oral tradition is encoding, in metaphor, the memory of the world you would have seen if you had lived on a coastline as the ice melted. What else, told to us in myth for thousands of years, are we still refusing to hear as memory? All of it comes back to one honest admission from mainstream archaeology itself. Number 1. The silence in the record. This entry is not a discovery. It is a confession, one that working archaeologists, paleontologists, and taphonomists have been making, quietly, in their technical literature for decades. The origin is not a single paper. It is the accumulated weight of every field season that ended with more questions than answers. The public model of the deep past treats the archaeological record as a nearly complete document, imperfect, but broadly representative of what existed. Under this model, if a civilization had existed, we would have found something: bones, tools, monuments, garbage pits, something. The record is not nearly complete. It is a scatter of fragments preserved by improbable accident, on land that has not since been eroded, submerged, built over, or burned. Roughly 8% of Earth's habitable land is currently underwater and unsurveyed at any archaeological resolution. Organic materials, wood, textile, leather, plant fiber, decay in most climates within centuries. Metals oxidize. Even stone tools, in tropical soils, break down within a few tens of thousands of years. Anatoly Derevianko at the Russian Academy of Sciences and countless others have written, plainly, that the deeper the time, the thinner the surviving evidence, until the evidence rate approaches zero. Every attempt to close the gap has run into the same walls. Surveying the drowned shelves is prohibitively expensive. Excavating under modern cities destroys evidence. Rainforest floors bury artifacts within years. Deserts scour them. Ice, until recently, hid them. Every new technology, LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, has revealed things that were, until that moment, invisible. And each revelation implies the next. The question isn't whether we have found every ancient human society that existed. We know we haven't. The question is only how much is missing, and how much of it we will ever recover. If the record is a candle in a dark room, how large is the room? Every entry on this list sits not at the outer edge of what we know. Each one sits at the center of a discipline we consider well-founded: geology, genetics, archaeology, paleoclimate. The universe is not confused. We are. Not evidence they existed, evidence we haven't looked in the right place yet. And the ground we haven't looked at, every year grows smaller. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen.